serious global. We all know that humanity faces serious global challenges: human rights, climate change, peace and security, malnourishment and hunger, refugees and migration, corruption, to name a few. National and international solutions cannot be achieved through political compromise alone. They must involve commitments to personal change and shared values. Here at UPF, the core values that we seek to implement are universal, interdependent, and mutually prosperous. Our first speaker today is Dr. John Bellavance. Dr. John Bellavance is the Vice President of Universal Peace Federation Australia, and he will argue for the need for raising awareness of our universal solidarity as one human family. The loss of values is serious because it causes materialism, which leads to the destruction of intra-family relationships. Additionally, the decline of moral and spiritual values has led to psychological and spiritual exhaustion. I now have the pleasure of asking Dr. Bellavance to begin his presentation. Thank you.
You're on mute, John. John, you are on mute. That's better.
Thank you, Roland. Appreciate that. I just want to say I'm going to start. Thank you, Will, for that introduction. And we will skip my 10 minutes of Q&A and go straight to Dr. Kittle. He's with us today, and I think it's a great opportunity for us to hear him speak as a key leader of our organization internationally. So let me begin by sharing my screen and my presentation with you today. So really, let me just get this out of the way here. Really, I want to talk about the core principles for peace building, which our Universal Peace Federation is trying to promote. The first one is, even in this video, Ban Ki-moon, former Secretary General of the UN, said that the model that UPF seeks to promote is really a way to transcend religious national interests through its network of peace builders in 150 countries. So you need to understand or study more about this model, because it is, as he said, and as we see, we seek to become a model UN. And as we know, the United Nations is facing some serious challenges. And so therefore, coming up with a model is actually very, very important. So one of the things that Dr. Moon has said is that he proposed as a means of, if you like, to bring peace in the world, is actually making an international highway that would link the world. And he suggested that we would start between the Korea-Japan tunnel and the Bering Strait tunnel between the US and Russia. This was actually first proposed to an audience of leading international scholars, including Nobel laureates, at the 10th International Conference on the Unity of Sciences held in Seoul, Korea in 1981. And he said the barriers between nations, religions, and races and cultures are all man-made. So hence we are called as peace builders to break down barriers and not build them. People are building barriers everywhere, and our job clearly in this global world and this global family is to break down barriers. So he called upon this international highway, and he talked about building this tunnel system between the United States and Russia. So in 2005, at the inaugural assembly of the Universal Peace Federation, he spoke about this. In fact, the Russian government took great interest in this idea, and several meetings were held to discuss the feasibility of the project in Russia in 2011. The tunnel proposal was also favorably received in 2009 at the Shanghai International Expo. So many have said that building an international highway that connects the world can't be done and it would cost too much. But the United States Department of Defense has reported that the direct spending in Iraq totals $757 billion. In fact, these tunnels could be built for half the price. So really, the question I thought about myself when I saw this proposal back in the day when he proposed it, I realized that only now that think about it, would the current war in the Ukraine, since we are talking about the Ukraine today, would it really have occurred? So if back in 2005 or even right after the Cold War, a tunnel linking the United States and Russia and the exchange that would come as a result of that between people and economic trade, let's think about that. What would have occurred with the current conflict? And I would say that Dr. Moon was visionary in understanding the importance of linking the world, not creating barriers. This peace tunnel or peace road was a visionary idea that could have actually turned the world as we see it today in a different direction. Okay, so values matter. Let's think about this. At the end of the Cold War, both the President of the United States said this: by the grace of God, we won the Cold War. Donald Rumsfeld, Secretary of State, said the Cold War was real and we won it. Recently, one of our academics in our organization, Dr. Ward, said that this actually was very short-sighted view of the world, because when the Cold War ended, shouldn't it have been the responsibility of the United States to actually embrace former Soviet countries, including Russia, and start immediately creating strong relationships with these countries, which is exactly what Dr. Moon did right with approaching Gorbachev and really trying to bring together the US and Russia. Would the world be different today? Absolutely. So this sort of Western pride and boasting was not the peace building approach that UPF would take. We would have, and we have, really taken an approach of service and creating bonds between countries. So instead of a win-lose, we could have a win-win situation. So this was an opportunity for peace building that was clearly missed. So why do values matter? Well, in UPF, if we ignore values as an individual, then there's a division between values and behaviors. There's a lot of people that can talk the talk, but fewer can walk the walk. So we cannot ignore values as an individual, otherwise we experience conflict between what we say and what we do. We cannot ignore values when we develop businesses and technological practices, because we end up destroying the environment or using people or using resources in an unethical way. We cannot ignore values when we talk about governance, about how governments run their affairs. So the second core principle, we've looked at reaching out, we've looked at the core values of what drives peace, is the rebuilding of the family. This is one of the core jobs of UPF. When the founder began UPF, he gave us a mandate. And we have ambassadors for peace with us today and other great peace builders that are here today and academics. He gave us two mandates. One is become a model UN, which I think we have now reached the point through our many, many years of work where we are being recognized as a global organization that has the capacity to play that role as a model UN. The second, he said, was to rebuild the family, that would be the core job of UPF. So let's have a look at the family. And I just want, since this is a primarily Australian audience, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about statistics of the Bureau of Statistics in Australia. And the marriage rate has been declining in Australia over time, reducing by 23% over the last 2 decades. So I asked myself, when I saw this information, I realized, are we losing, are young people losing the belief in marriage and in long-term relations? That is a big question, because relations between men and women are critical when we look at the well-being of society and the happiness of people, isn't it? So I also thought about, do young people want to have children? When I look at and speak with many young people today, young couples, they say, oh, it's too hard. It's a lot of work. It costs a lot of money. So the question is, where are we going with the family relations in Australia? I guess the bad news and the good news is that also divorce has, have been, for example, 49,000 divorces were granted in Australia, which is an increase from 2019. But the divorce rate has decreased basically since 2000. So I suppose there's 2 ways of looking at it. Some people say, well, during the pandemic, there were less people getting married. And the other one is that less people are simply interested in getting married, which of course the statistics show that that is true. So we have to ask ourselves the implications of all that. So the family is the basis for a good society. So the change that has the most far-reaching consequences for family life is separation and divorce. Now, why is this? Because research tells us that there are risks associated with the absence of love and of values in the family. So when we look, I want to share with you this, that when we look at peace building in Australia, in our region, when we look at the concept of mutual prosperity and development, the UN understands at the core that the family plays a significant role both socially, spiritually, economically. So we have to understand that breakdown in relations in the family have massive economic, social consequences for our nation in Australia, but also the world. Research, for example, tells us that risks associated with the absence of love, particularly in childhood, leads to difficulties within the family or in the relationship with your partner later on. So what I experience as a child, what a child experiences when he grows up, has an impact on how that child interacts with others and even their partner in the future. And it's actually a cause of depression. There are emotional, social, financial costs to this. Children raised by parents are at greater risk of poverty. This is the research. They're at greater risk of experiencing health issues, academic and behavioral problems. So mental health issues for both men and women associated with divorce include the disruption of primary affectional bond. So we know that divorce is a very difficult process emotionally between men and women. It leads to insecurity, depression, hostility, self-acceptance issues, a decline of personal growth and positive relationships with others. But also research suggests that having divorced parents is actually the highest risk factor for divorce in one's own marriage. Well, this may be because children of divorced parents receive poor socialization and role modeling in their own marriage. Additionally, children of divorced parents have more behavioral problems as opposed to intact families, which turn negatively affects the quality of their relationships in adulthood. So the United Nations maintained that to be effective, poverty reduction programs should focus on families and family dynamics. Families are the hub of intergenerational interactions that support us in our lives. Let's explore that. In UPF, we call the family is the school of love. Family life is where we experience our first values and emotional and social learning. We learn respect shown for women when we see our fathers do this. I know my own father did this, and I think that was a very important influence. We learn, how to behave as older brothers. We learn to love and respect our relationship with our siblings and relationship with our parents. So how we think and feel about ourselves, how we think and react about feelings are first learned in the family. The values of empathy, respect, justice, altruism, and love for others are first learned in the family. So hence, a civil society is sustained and renewed by the values that are fostered in the family. Now, this is a big job. I mean, as Universal Peace Federation talks about rebuilding, regenerating the family, this is a very serious topic which has huge implications. And it is one of our core businesses that we need to focus on. I just want to share just a little story. I remember in Canada, my father was a pilot, and it was this was in the 60s and early 60s. My father had broken down with his car, so he had gone in a flight and come back late, and his car broke down in the middle of the night, and he basically almost froze to death. And he was picked up by the police, brought home, and I remember I must have been 8 or 9 years old, and I heard the noise in the middle of the night and stuck my neck out and looked at what was going on out of my bedroom and looked at what was going on in the living room. And my mother had a blanket over my father, and she was cuddling him. And I remember this vividly because I realized it sort of hit me that my mother really loves my father. And I think that itself is a memory I will never forget. It's an emotional memory because children really love the fact that parents love each other. So let's talk now a little bit about what Dr. Moon talked about, the 4 spheres of love in the family. So what's the first source of love in our family? Well, the family relationships are the foundation for the emotional content necessary for our happiness, Dr. Moon said. He said our growth and our capacity to love and creative relationships with others in the society are based on our experiences, love, and values in the family. So the standards of values establishes in the ethics of love in the family expand and have an impact in all of our lives. The love and values of my wife and I share became the standard of value for how we behave towards others. And that's true for all of us. The commitments we make to each other, the trust that we create, the love between siblings sets the standard how we relate to others in society. How we treat our parents and set the standard for how we deal with people of all ages and older people. Within the family, we can experience this interdependent system of the 4 spheres of love, of parental love for children, children's love for their parents, siblings' love, and conjugal love. The values we acquire and the love we experience through these relationships allow us to become happy and functional human beings. So the first is the love that we experience from our parents, because our development starts when we receive love as a child. Research shows that parental love for children is foundation for their development and for all relationships as children grow up. How critical is that? I'm a teacher, and I can tell you that's a critical relationship, parent and child. We know this. For example, parental values and love affect how siblings relate to each other, how they relate to their spouse or others, how children understand romance and gender role. This is all modeled within the family. Society tries to create many programs that are very vital to educate young people. As a teacher, I see every single imaginable program roll out through schools, but really the core business is the family. This is where it occurs. Research also suggests that children who have insecure attachment to their parents have more instances of sibling conflict. When a parent expressed their expectations and hope to the child, these hopes become part of who they are. Having 4 sons, Anne and I understand that our values, that doesn't mean they accepted everything, but at the core, their values were very much influenced and their self-image by what we were trying to achieve. The second love is children learn to love their parents. And third love is their siblings. They love their siblings. Children are mostly self-centered, we know this. But as they grow up and interact with their parents and siblings, their capacity to consider the needs of others increases. Children learn that the well-being of the family is as important as their own. This process fosters the values of altruism and living for the sake of others, which is a core value at UPF. This process fosters the values that will allow them to develop, if they're developed sufficiently, and then their ability to love one spouse can blossom more easily, as I've said. Also, how children relate to their parents is all of these relationships occur there. And finally, the fourth sphere of love is our capacity, is spousal love. And that is our capacity to love increases as husband and wife. So in our lifetime, essentially, our goal, as Dr. Moon has always said, that our goal is to develop our hearts in these 4 spheres of love and experience the richness and depth of love that these relationships offer. So when we come to the topic of mutual prosperity and interdependence, we can understand that this model is a two-way street. So first, if you can see from the first arrow, loving families foster relationships that are characterized by values of interdependence and mutual prosperity. That's what we do. We look after each other. So, but in the family, each sphere opens a new and rich experience of love, which we talked about. And this builds upon others, facilitating growth into the next, like expanding circles. Dr. Ungar, a Canadian noted scholar on resilience, maintains that relationships and support structures that exist in the family, the extended family, the community, the school, are the spheres and layers of love that allow children to become adults, to develop their experiences and their well-being. Hence, beyond the nuclear family, think about it, grandparents, aunties, uncles, friends, schools, spiritual community, clubs, are the additional layers of support, and these are indicated by that arrow that come and support the child. It takes truly a village to raise a child. So people who have social support from families and friends and community are happier, have fewer health problems, live longer, and so on. I highly recommend that you look at the 2030 report by the OECD report on the economics of OECD is an organization of economic states, saying that by 2030, many governments, including OECD countries, will not have enough money to support all the services that are needed for people to have well-being. One of my friends is a nurse, and she said she encounters this all the time, that people who grow older, who are alone, then who provides the services that normally would be provided by the family, and it's actually the government that has to do it. The OECD report says that by 2030, we will start facing serious challenges because there will not be enough money to support these families. Well, think about this. So it means if you're part of UPF family and we help each other, well, that's a real benefit. But really at the core, if we have a family and we grow old and with each other and we can try and help each other and we have family around us, that makes a whole difference in how our well-being and how we will be taken care of. So what the OECD is telling countries like Australia, the United States, Canada, and so on, that you really need to consider what model of the family you will have in the future. How will this be sustainable? Now, this model goes the other way. This is the concept of interdependence and mutual prosperity. Because in the end, good family members become good citizens. They go out into the world. So this is indicated by the upward arrow. This interdependence and reciprocity is indicated by the two-arrow figure. A peaceful society and resembles the form of a functional, peaceful family. Good family members become good citizens. When such people leave their homes, they become people who are loved by others in society. Quote from Dr. Moon. And I find that that's very important. I look at my own children and I think if they're raised well, then the boys, my sons, will become people who are loved by others because they genuinely bring those values into society. So we can relate to others outside our own family as if they were our brothers and sisters in that way, that our parents, as our parents and grandparents. So we should look at people as if they were our parents and grandparents and so on. So I'd like to just conclude by saying, well, this is an idealistic situation to look at the ideal family, but actually families can also be dysfunctional schools of love. And we understand that because many of our emotional hangups, our prejudices, how we treat others, and our insecurities come from family relations. So the family can also be a school of violence, where 27% of children who are in homes where violence occurs witness that violence. So the family can also be the school of abusive relationship. Research suggests that a history of childhood abuse, and many adults who were abused as children were abusers themselves, and were abused themselves, I'm sorry. And the exposure to spousal violence are risk factors for perpetuating child abuse. A significant percentage of sexual abuse is perpetrated by family members or caregivers who are close to the child. So according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, of the 1.5 million Australian adults who were sexually abused as children, only a small minority were abused by strangers. So in the family, we learn to live for the sake of others. Mutual prosperity, interdependence in the world. We need peace builders who can understand the importance of living for the sake of others. I have to constantly remind myself this as a leader in this organization, that my life is not just for myself, but for others. Now that's an easy thing to say, but that doesn't naturally always occur, right? So Dr. Moon has asked the question, what comes first? Is it giving or receiving? And you can answer that question for yourself, but generally, actually giving starts first. That's where value begin. Shared values, we empathize and are aware of the needs of others, and communication are based on the concept of living for the sake of others. So yeah, living for the sake of others is a simple principle.
John, sorry, I'll just give you 2 minutes, please.
All right, I'll conclude by saying that once the values are established within the family, society, then these also can expand to the nation, but it goes the other way around as well. And that is that the world, we have to have societies and nations that are concerned about the world, but the world and the nations also support our society. So living for the sake of others is the key to that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bellavance, for a lovely and enlightening presentation. And I'm sure it would be a beautiful world, a lovely world if we could all aspire to a model of family love and and love in general. I would like to say that today we are privileged and to have with us a prominent, a very well-known leader within the Universal Peace Federation family. We have with us here Dr. Robert Kittle, who is the co-chair of Universal Peace Federation Asia Pacific. His topic today will be on the need of universal values, their determination and identification. There is the United Nations Secretary General, the late Kofi Annan, once warned, more than ever before, universal values are acutely needed in this age of globalization. And he was right. Why do we need universal values is academic. As the title of this seminar suggests, understanding what these universal values are is urgent and indispensable and is our immediate global challenge. This understanding must be able to embrace all histories, religions, ideologies, and philosophies and bring unity among them. I would like now to ask Dr. Robert Kittle to please present us with his topic, and thank you kindly.
Thank you, Will, for the introduction and emceeing this program. Thank you, John, for the invitation. Let's begin. So, the topic today is meeting our global challenges together beyond religious and ideological divides. The topic that I have chosen is the need for universal values. So of the three, mutual prosperity and interdependence, I will focus on one, universal values. I will identify the need for them and also specifically what these values are. Therefore, there will be two parts to this presentation: the purpose for universal values and identifying exactly what these values are. Let's begin with the first one. I need not mention that this organization is founded by Father Moon, but I will mention the importance of Father Moon being in Asia, because the Asian family unit is stronger, and therefore his concepts imbibe this ideal family model in every element that he teaches. As mentioned by Will, Kofi Annan warned us, universal values are more acutely needed in this age of globalization, as we are seeing played out in Europe more than ever before. Why? Well, a Jewish scholar and internet sensation, Dennis Prager, said, without shared values, how does a society survive? It doesn't. So why do we need universal values? For our own survival. Pretty basic, right? So principles are everywhere. Everything operates by principles. If you want to be an architect, you have to study the principle of architecture because the building will lean or fall down otherwise. You want to be an electrical engineer, you better study the principles of electrical engineering because that building might burn down. Civil engineers, study the principle of civil engineering because if that bridge falls down, you will be responsible. They will come and get you. In the atoms, there are principles, and we can't begin to harness the energy of the atoms without understanding these principles. We cannot travel interstellarly without understanding these principles. They apply in the principles of aerodynamics when we fly an airplane. There are principles to medicine, and even in the kitchen, there are principles. Let's say you want to bake a turkey. Well, you better know the principles. You need three things you have to learn. The three things you have to know. How much does the turkey weigh? How hot is the oven? And how long will I leave that bird in the oven? And you think, well, I'll just wing it. I don't need principles. I'll just wing it. Well, your wings might be singed by the time you take out the turkey, and then, oh man, what a mess. All right, anyway, what about peace? We dream of peace. We see peace in nature. That is not enough. We need, and this is key, the principles of peace, because from these principles will come the universal values. So we need to understand them. That's the beginning point. But then we also have the responsibility to live them in our own lives. The notion of universal principles is akin to the idea of the rule of law. There's some universal law that we all must live by. There are universal principles that operate, and we need to live by them. The Magna Carta was the first attempt to really place us before the law equally, equality before the law. Of course, it was written in 1215. It was written by the Archbishop of Canterbury. So it has as its kind of basis this religious element to it. It protected religious freedom, prohibited illegal imprisonment, limited feudal payment or taxes. It was at that time more fable than fact, but it was unforgettable. It was an idea that people could not let go of, something too good to be true. And so it was revived again in the 16th century and became the basis for habeas corpus. In other words, there can be no imprisonment without a trial. More currently, Todd Zwitzky, he is a scholar and a lawyer. He wrote an article called The Rule of Law, Freedom and Prosperity. I want to highlight just two things from his article. He said we have to avoid arbitrary action, and the rule of law will help us do that. And secondly, this concept of equality before the law. Arbitrary action. The rule of law helps us create wealth. Three reasons. Decision-making is based on set rules. Therefore, they are predictable and people are held accountable. Important for creating wealth. Secondly, the rule of law protects property rights and contracts become secure. Therefore, arbitrary action, which is usually self-centered, is restrained. That's a good thing. The rule of law increases social stability and dependability. People will be willing to invest and take risks, a necessary element for creating wealth. So, Dr. Zwitzky said, democratic elections are far less important than the rule of law in building economic growth. So we have countries that don't have the ideal model or somewhere even close to the ideal model of democratic elections, and yet have been very prosperous. Singapore, Cambodia, and there are others. Second point, equality before the law. This concept is based on the Bible, actually Genesis 1:27, that we are created in the image of God. So that means if we are equal before God, well, we should be equal before the law. And therefore, this challenged the divine right of, and this is under the law, must follow the law. So the forgotten roots of the Magna Carta should be viewed as, in part, a major Christian contribution to the freedom of the individual and the limitation of the state. Very important. The third point, If we are equal before the law, rights have responsibilities. Therefore, even within this context, there's a covenantal relationship between God and the people. God will bless them, but they have to follow God's law. Finally, and I think this is where Father Moon makes a very unique and powerful contribution. Even God must live by the principles. I don't have time to go into it, so I invite you to study specifically why God allowed evil. God is almighty, yes. God is all-knowing, omniscient, yes. And God is all good, yes. So God didn't want evil. He knew how to stop it. He had the strength to do it, and yet evil existed. Why? Because God must live by his principles. The details you do need to study later. It's really, really important. So the basic problem is this: we need laws. They're beneficial for many reasons. If those laws are imposed from outside, then we rebel and we reject, we're bitter, we're angry, and no, I want my freedom. Well, the other alternative, if the laws are ignored, okay, just do what you want to do, laissez-faire, it's okay, then anarchy. It seems like those are the two choices that we have today. There's another alternative. There's a solution to this. And this is where UPF has a unique and powerful role to play. Voluntary submission. How? Very simple. Principle education. So we need to teach people what these rules and laws and principles are and why they are beneficial for them, their family, their society, and the overall well-being. So it means then when you teach these principles, you're not imposing the law, you're not ignoring the law. It is self-imposed through education. This is why education is so important. Not just ABC 1, 2, 3 history, that's important. But the essence of education must teach the basic principles of life itself. This is what Mother Moon is doing and why she is phenomenally successful. In just a short time, everybody thought when Father Moon passed away, you know, the movement that they built, their global movement, would just collapse. It didn't. It flourished. In the speech, you saw the video at the beginning. At the conclusion of that summit, that World Summit, this is what Mother Moon taught the leaders of the world that were there, in person and in video. A world of true peace, freedom, equality, unity, and happiness is only possible if nations attend to God as their parent. Now, she's not saying faith in God. She didn't put that word there. This is a concept rooted in, again, the Asian, Korean culture of filial piety, attendance. We need to attend God. Any person that's in a court has to understand what are the rules of attendance. So in order to attend God, we need to know the fundamental principles by which God himself is bound, not from outside, but from within. We need to know these fundamental principles. So that leads me to the second part of this presentation, identifying these universal principles. What are the universal principles? Not so fast. First, what are the criteria? Let's be very serious. What should be the criteria? There are 5. These principles must apply everywhere. Africa, Asia, America, doesn't matter where you live. They must apply anywhere, anytime, past, present, and future. So they have to be unchanging. They must be scalable. That means the principles that apply in my life that bring me peace individually will be exactly the same principles that will help bring peace to my family. And those principles will bring peace to my society, to my nation, and to the world. We can't have a different set at every level of society. What a chaotic situation that would be. Number 4, they must make sense. Scientific, logical, and simple. The farmer in the field that may not be able to read and write, if I told him these, yep, those are true. And the PhD student at the university, if I taught these, yep, and I'll write a book about them. I'll write an encyclopedia about them. Finally, they must apply to everyone. All cultures, all religions, all races. So that goes to the theme, beyond ideological divide, beyond religion. So now we're hitting really the core of the theme of this event. So Father Moon, in his book, this was kind of like the mission statement of Father Moon's work. It's in his book, Divine Principle. This truth that he discovered must be able to embrace all historical religions, ideologies, and philosophies, and bring complete unity within them. That's his mission statement. That's the goal that he has for his life. So, if these teachings that we will share with you just briefly, it'll be like the tip of the iceberg, not 10% of the iceberg, but 10% of the visible 10%. We don't have time to go into it, but you need to study more. If these teachings are universally true, they should help you to be a better Christian, a better Buddhist, a better Jew, a better Confucius, Hindu, or Muslim. It doesn't matter. In other words, you do not need to change your religion to be good. Why? Very simply, these universal principles are embedded in all religions, and because they're embedded in all religions, they are therefore transcendent of all religions. Wow. Is it really possible? This is actually amazing. Don't get too comfortable when I say you don't need to change your religion, because once you know these principles, you are responsible, and we need to change our attitudes, priorities, behavior, character, and culture. We have a big job, but changing religion will not solve our problem. So what are the universal principles? My first question, how many are there? How many? How many universal principles are there? Most people that hear some aspect of this for the first time, they would just be guessing. Well, the answer is simple. Two. That's really simple. There are two universal principles. One is called the dual purpose principle, and the other one called the pair system principle. The dual purpose principle begins the relationship of mind and body. So it's a priority. It's not unity of mind and body. It's the priority of mind over body, because if you reverse that priority, you get into trouble. So the mind needs to give direction and guidance to the body. That priority is critical. The pair system principle, relationship is more horizontal. So one is vertical and the other is horizontal. Makes sense. So let's look at the first one. The mind-body is a vertical relationship. We call that the pillar because it's vertical. If you build a building, the first thing you do is put up the pillars. And how tall you want that building? Well, that will be how tall those pillars are. How strong you want that building? That will be in the strength of those pillars. Not 89, not 91, 90 degrees, vertical, straight. It's a pillar. The pillar within us and in society works like this. The mind gives direction to the body because the mind has a higher priority. It can see and hear and listen and interact socially. So it's a higher priority. We give it priority. Then the individual says there's something higher than myself, and that's my family. Doesn't stop there. There's something even higher than myself, and that is my community. Well, my community has laws, and I need to make contributions to help the community. It's called taxes. Then there's something even greater than my community, and I will live for that. My nation. And then finally, the world. Ultimately, of course, is God. So this is how it works. This is the basic principle, priority for the greater good. And then this vertical tradition will be established. If it's priority for the lesser good, you will destroy this vertical tradition. Let's look. Good character is built when my mind governs my body. I live, and that's the beginning of the pillar. Then the next step, I become a filial child. My family is more important than myself. A higher step. Oh, my community, I'm a good citizen. I will easily follow the laws and rules and regulations. I will easily pay my taxes. I'm a good citizen. And that pillar grows. A loyal patriot is not just a soldier on the battlefield that has the gun and will fight, kill or be killed, but everybody must be a patriot. The businessman, the religious leader, the teacher, the garbage collector. Everyone needs to be a patriot, meaning that the nation is more important than their own community or their family. And the pillar grows. Finally, the world, we become global-minded citizens. Ultimately, of course, we become the children of God, the highest level. So just as an example to show you how important this is, we have a problem in Ukraine and Russia. Vladimir Putin is a patriot. In one sense, he loves Russia. But his concept of patriotism means I can sacrifice other nations and the well-being of the world for the sake of my Russia. No, no, no. If you're a true patriot, then you must also include the greater good, the world, the harmony of other nations. So not only should you love your own nation as a patriot, you should love other nations as well, if not more. How? Gandhi ji from India, this is inscribed in Gandhi's Samadhi. I would like to see India free and strong, and you can apply Australia or any other country. The individual being pure sacrifices for the family. We say priority, he says sacrifice. And then the family sacrifices, whoops, excuse me, let me go back. The family for the village, then the village for the district for the province for the nation for all, for Raj, the kingdom of God. Wow, it was taught when Gandhi was alive, and it's inscribed in stone. Father Moon said this: live for the sake of others, live for the greater good. Let's see now the second one. The pillar is horizontal, the man-woman relationship. Everything. The word everything, we can exchange that and call it, it's ubiquitous. It is actually everywhere. In the atomic world, we have protons and electrons, and people say, yes, we've got neutrons, yeah, but the proton and the electron got married and became a neutron. And that brings the stability to the atom. In the plant world, stamen and pistil. In the animal world, everything is created in pairs, everything. In human society, east or west, we are created with two, male and female. So going back to our two fundamental universal principles. One is the pillar, the other is the beam, vertical, horizontal. And when you put the pillars and beams together, you get the basic structure of a building. And you can put the doors and the windows wherever you want. You can have whatever color of carpet or curtain that you want, and you can change the doors and the windows and the curtains and the carpets, but you cannot change. They are unchanging, the pillars and beams, the fundamental structure that is covered once this building is complete. That fundamental structure cannot change. Inside this building are the pillars and beams that hold up that building. If you remove the pillars and beams, that building will implode, collapse, boom. The same is true within my character. If I don't have the pillars and beams in my character, it will implode. My family will implode. My society, my nation, my world. In fact, the rise and fall of civilizations is because we haven't understood these fundamental universal principles. Let's go back. The fundamental principle of the dual purpose. The mind has a purpose and the body has a purpose. They're different purposes. They need to be aligned correctly. They are aligned correctly when we live for the sake of others. That aligns the mind and body, and that's the beginning of this vertical standard. The man-woman relationship, they are honored in marriage to the highest degree possible, where man and woman share everything together. And when they create children equally. Man gives 23 chromosomes, woman gives 23, and bingo, 46, a new baby is conceived. What if man gave 24 and woman gave 22? God didn't make it that way. Wow, that'd be a real problem, especially in this day and age, right? Anyway, so living for the sake of others. Let me go into it a little bit. The mind-body relationship. We have an internal nature that's invisible. The external form is the body. Because the mind is able to interact with others, then it's more of a higher priority. The body is for self-maintenance. So I have my heart, my lung, my digestive system. That's for my self-maintenance. But my mind is for public interaction, where I can see, hear, listen to, even share food together, smell the flowers as we walk around. The beginning point of uniting the mind and body is honor your parents, the family. In the family, we learned the first step of the correct alignment of mind and body as children. And it's love. Children love their parents. They will honor them and follow them. They will listen to them and try to do what their parents say. If we find this scripture, we find this teaching in scriptures in the Bible. Whoever seeks to gain his life will lose it. Selfishness will lose your life. Seek to gain your life, take, finished. But whoever loses his life will preserve it. In the Quran, by no means shall you attain righteousness unless you freely give of that which you love. And whatever you give of truth, God, Allah knows well. Wow. We cannot be righteous without giving what we love. Oh man. Buddhism, misers do not go to heaven, but noble men find joy in generosity. Miser is stingy, selfish people. I don't want to give. I just want to take. Finished. Cannot go to heaven. Joy and generosity in this world and in the next world. Wow. The Bhagavad Gita. A gift is pure when it is given from the heart to the right person at the right time, at the right place, and when we expect nothing in return. Wow. If you give and you expect something back, they call it a politician. I'm joking. No, there are good politicians too. Anyway, let's continue. In psychology, Sigmund Freud, delayed gratification. Don't take so quickly. Delay it. Control your impulse. That's a sign of maturity, intellectual and emotional intelligence. The Good Society. The most profound decisions about justice are not made by individuals as such, but individuals thinking on behalf of institutions. That's the key point. Individuals just think on their own behalf. Well, normally selfish desires and ambitions and thoughts come into play. Mother Teresa, I love her. I met her in Calcutta. Give, but give until it hurts. Everyone can relate to that, right? Not just the coins in the pocket. Take out the bills from your wallet in the back pocket. Yeah. Live for the sake of others. Everything is there. So let's look at the second principle very quickly. Honor marriage between a man and a woman. God created man in his own image. Not only individually, but man and woman together are also created in the image of God. Wow. Male and female. In the Quran, everything we have created in pairs. Have we not created you in pairs? And he, Allah, did create in pairs. And if you look at the 99 names of Allah, many of them have feminine attributes. You know, the caregiver, giving birth. Oh, man. In Buddhism, He is the father and mother to the people of the world. Mahapani Nirvana Sutra, the last teaching of Buddha. I am the father and the mother of the universe. I'm the source of the father. I am the mother. I'm the creator of all. Every religion, because of the importance of marriage, every religion honors marriage. Every religion teaches young people, warns them, better not have sex before you are married or outside of marriage. That is universal. We're losing that, and that's really the concern that we have. Mother Moon, we marry in order to resemble God. Together, husband and wife are the reflection of God's original nature. So, coming to the conclusion, universal principles. Every religion is searching for these universal principles. They have different names. They call it the Logos, the Sharia, the Dhamma, the Mandi, the Tao, the Marga, the commandment, the divine law, the covenant. All right, we have different names. But every religion is looking for these universal values, which are unchanging. Because they're unchanging, they are the most valuable thing that we have. The diamond that never scratches, the gold that never rusts. Two universal principles. Live for others and start the vertical tradition in your life and in your family. Honor marriage. Both of these principles are learned, imbibed, taught, educated every day in the family. The family is where these principles are the strongest and most powerful. Our meeting, our global challenges together beyond religious and ideological divides. Today, of course, is the United Nations Day, the theme, families and urbanization. When we lived on the farm, did we need the family? Yes, it was obvious. In the agrarian societies, it was our employment. What are you going to do? Well, you go out and work in the field. You know, it's our healthcare system, it's our marriage, Social Security, insurance, retirement. Everything is connected with the family in agrarian societies. Well, what about our cement jungles that we live in urbanization? As the United Nations Day of the Family is, do we need the family now? Equally, if not more. Family in urban societies. It's our sense of belonging. It's our inner joy, happiness, and love. It's our emotional stability. It's where we are safest and the environment around us is safest, the lowest crime rates. It's health, mental, physical, emotional health. Education, children that grow up in two-parent families do better in school, period. Period. They go to school more with the homework done, they graduate, they go to higher education. That's a no-brainer. John was sharing some of the data. And finances, wow. People that live in families are healthier and wealthier as well. No time to go into it. Because of this, the Universal Peace Federation, this is their statement on the family, my closing statement. The breakdown of the family contributes to a wide range of social problems. By strengthening the family, we can build a stronger base of social capital that will enhance the overall quality of life for everyone. Thank you for your attention, for the invitation, for the time we spent together. I look forward to questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kittle. Can we all please put a hand together for Dr. Kittle for a very delighting presentation. I would like now to, well, I already have a few people have their hands up for questions, and I will take Chris, if you would like to go ahead. All right. Chris, did you have a question? All right. Adeni, would you like to go ahead with your question, please?
Will
Yeah,
also,
thank you.
Janine had her hand up too. Sorry, Denny.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. Especially, I'll start with our leader, my mentor, Dr. Bellavance John, and everyone, the leaders here. It's actually a very good presentation. And both the first one, especially the video, sent a good message to all of us. And I was looking at the video, I saw the collectivity of nations, how they put peace first based on the foundation of our Father Moon. I just want to also talk a little bit more to appreciate what Dr. Bellavance said, and the last speaker, Dr. Keating. I really think this kind of seminar should be more, because this should go broad enough, because especially what we covered today, what the presentation for today covered a lot of things happening in our society. There's a saying, when I was growing up, they say charity begins at home. And it was really defined well from the family, when we're talking about the family, broken homes. And again, I see no reason why we cannot remain peaceful. And this is a very good point to continue to make sure people know that we will stand for peace as ambassadors for peace. And what is happening in Palestine now is something that we are not happy about. We love Russia, we love Palestine, we love every nation, Palestine, Ukraine, Israel, even Nigeria, we love every country. But the thing is, we need to do more to see how other leaders, world leaders, can put their voices into this. It was really great on the video to see what Donald Trump said, to see what even the current president of Nigeria, Muhammad Buhari, who is from my country, and you see all the world leaders. So please, can we also involve our prime ministers in Australia, in other Oceania countries, to also begin to speak out? Because the more we speak out, the more people go back and sit down. Today, I have a lot of takeaway, and I'm going to be sharing it with my church member tomorrow, part of what I've learned today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Adini.
Thank you.
Certainly, there was a lot of takeaways from that presentation. And I have a question.
Let me comment just a little bit here. Thank you, Evangelist Ikain. Our movement in Africa is particularly strong. We had 16 current heads of state that wanted to come to the World Summit. They were willing to risk traveling during COVID, and they are the elderly statesmen, the most vulnerable in this pandemic. They were willing to come, but the Korea was going through a very intense time of COVID kind of explosion in the country, and they just locked it down. So even the heads of state that wanted to go couldn't. And when something happened, when Russia invaded Ukraine, Macky Sall, president of Senegal, who is the chairman of the African Union and has met Mother Moon, we've had our programs there, and I'm sure that some of our effort was there behind him, our prayers were there. He called personally Vladimir Putin. And I don't know how long they talked, but it was a substantial amount of time. And his message was, please withdraw your troops from Ukraine. So this collective voice is really, really important, what we are building, this community of people that are encouraged to speak out, willing to speak out, emboldened because the foundation is there, the education, even just meeting us a few times. then we see these type of scenarios. Goodluck Jonathan, who is the former Prime Minister of Nigeria, is the head of the International
President.
Summit Council of the whole of Africa. So he's well represented there. But thank you for your comments. It's really, really important and wonderful. Thank you.
Yep,
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I have a question here through the chat box, and I'll come back to Randall and Nelson in a minute. She says, thank you. How do we implement these global values and principles into our schools?
That's my question. The model that we are using, I'm living in the Philippines. I've lived in Asia now for almost 50 years. I'm currently living in the Philippines. The model that we are using here in the Philippines and in Cambodia and in Thailand is that we build relationships with the schools, relationships with the government, because the schools are not independent. You have to have both of those relationships. So we do that through our activities. They won't know us by our words. We can say who we are, but that's self-promotion. We have to show them who we are through our action. So in Thailand, for example, we had done specifically pure love education, where the same problems are there: family breakdown, kids are involved in drugs. And we had a very clear and powerful educational program teaching the importance of the family and also the risks involved with premarital relationships and the fallacy of the logic that goes behind that. The Thailand government liked it. They gave us $100,000 and said, please make your program better. Whoa. All right. Here in the Philippines, we did a program with the government, and we wanted to teach the Pure Love program to young people because that's kind of our forte. But the government asked us, do you have anything to prevent college students from being indoctrinated with the communist ideology? Because there's recruiting going on. There is an insurgency. It's limited, but it's still there, and the government's concerned about it. We said, yeah, Father Moon is the leader in terms of dissecting the fallacy of communism, not to say you're wrong, we're right, but to say, how can we correct this? Because it's not just here in the Philippines, it was primarily in, Europe at that time, and nobody gave such a clear critique. So the government of the Philippines, they were doing their traditional critique, just, I don't want to put the government down, but kind of like pointing out all the bad things, bad-mouthing communism. But they didn't have the academic clout that was needed to dissect communism for a college student so they can understand, yeah, this ideology is unprincipled. So we explain what the principle is and then why communism is unprincipled. We go into a tremendous amount of detail. We had 17 programs in all of the regions of the Philippines last year, and the government said, we want more. Let's take this program into the school systems, into the high schools where the students are there, and into the college. So it's Chad and DepEd. So we're now working to bring those programs there. In Cambodia, you saw Hun Sen is working with us, and they are also asking, how can we, the same question you ask, every parent should be asking that question. Every teacher, every administrator should be asking the same question. How can we help our kids? And when we show them the educational programs that we have, I've heard teachers tell me this. I've just watched and observed our programs. This was in Thailand, and I'm sitting next to some teachers. This is the best program. We've had others. The government tries to solve the problem. They can see teen pregnancy increases, drug abuse, dropout. The government is watching. They're keeping statistics. They know what is happening. They try to solve, they can't, they invite other people, then we come. This is the best program. This is the best program. How can we make it bigger and better? Let's work together. So when Mother Moon came to Thailand to launch the youth movement there, the International Association of Youth and Students, we had a program at the largest indoor stadium, I forgot the name of it. Anyway, the largest indoor stadium in Bangkok. The government of Thailand brought 8,000 students, pulled them out of school and brought them to our program because they trust us and know us. We said they wanted to bring more. We said, you can't, because we have to fill up the other 8,000 with our foundation in Thailand. So this is how you do it. You put your nose to the grindstone and you continue working. It will happen. It's too good not to. So anyway, long answer for a short question. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kettle. Randall, you have your hand up. Would you like to go ahead, please?
Thank you. Dr. Kittle, the Russia will at some stage withdraw from Ukraine, but I'm seeing that the UPF principles are going to be really good when it comes to how can you live next door to a neighbor that still has the potential to invade you again and again and again. So how do you overcome historical enemies, living next door to historical enemies? It might actually be a topic for a future talk, but I'm thinking that the principles that we have of how to overcome and how to better the border relationships between historical enemies is a big factor, and that can be expressed in Africa, in between the islands, or wherever else we want to be.
Good question. Yeah, next conference. No, let me just touch on it quickly. The answer is understanding who the enemy is. The enemy is not Russia. The enemy is the idea that a powerful nation can use its military to invade a neighboring country. That's the enemy. So how do you fight the enemy? With another idea. And that's where this education, so in these programs, like you saw the World Summit, then we are following up locally. We don't have time at the conference itself, but you're building relationships at the conference. And then afterwards, we follow up locally with the education. So it does take time, but it's the long-term effective solution. Identify the enemy and then realize that, education is really critical for the answer. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Dr. Kittle, you mentioned the models that the Philippines have implemented with your efforts. What are the likely chances of seeing this, model working in places like United States, for example? What are the UPF efforts being enabled to promote that model of family and that model of that goodness that you presented on your webinar in other countries beside Thailand and beside Philippines?
Yeah, this is the best kept secret in the world today, is that UPF is active. I think it's close to 150, 160 active in those countries. Of course, the degree varies, but thankfully, we are particularly active in America, in Japan, in Korea. We've done a lot in Europe, in Asia Pacific. So it's really the connection locally, like this conference. This is a local conference, but it's an important bridge builder and it's an important opportunity to educate. For example, what we did to try and multiply, we're not just happy about the program in the Philippines, but in the middle of this program last year, I read in the newspaper that Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, signed a bill in his state saying that, a lot of them are coming from, leftist type of governments with, the influence Central and South America. So he wanted to educate his students. So he signed a bill saying all high school students must study, quote, the evil of communism, end quote. Really, that's a bill by the government, nothing to do with us. But I said, we do have something, and we have something that the government is supporting here in the Philippines. Well, government and government can talk to each other. So the lecture manual that we created afterwards, because people were asking for it, we printed out, and we have 131 VIPs that were endorsing this program. And then I contacted our program in America, our UPF leadership in America, Dr. Jenkins, Michael Jenkins, and I said, you know, can we try at least, you know, let's do fishing, cross-fertilization. And the lady that prayed on the video, her name is Paula White. She was the personal pastor to Donald Trump well before he even tried to run for president. She's from Florida. So I met her at the World Summit. I said, let's have lunch together. I showed her the manual. And I said, do you know anybody in the education department in the state of Florida? She said, yes. So it's this personal networking. That's what these conferences are about. They're not conferences just for the intellectual exchange of ideas, but to build personal relationships and help this grow more quickly. So we need the grassroots, and we have also the international working together, both of those. Good question. Thank you.
Will, I was going to jump in. Welcome, Stefan. He's our final speaker. Welcome, welcome. You will be introduced soon, Stefan.
Thank you.
You're
Good
welcome.
to have you with us, Stefan.
Will, I was going to say, I'd like to take a few pictures. You know, you could do a screenshot on a computer. So are you folks able to just turn your cameras on just for 2 minutes? Those of you who can. I think some of you are working or traveling. We get that, but if you can, and I'll actually take a couple of pictures. Wow, look at all these faces coming. All right. So I'm going to do a couple of screenshots here. So give me some time. And then Will, I'll pass it back to you. So big smile, everyone.
Yep.
Ah, that was good. A good one. All right, let me do the next one. Ah, more faces. It's called function print screen. For those of you who are Windows computers, I'm an IT teacher, so quite nerdy and love to talk about this. I'm going to do one more, Will, and then I will pass it on to you. All right, Will, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Look, I think, Aldini, do you have a question? You had your hand up. Do you have a question to ask, Dr. Kittle?
Yeah, yes, please. Yes, please.
Go ahead.
Just one question, and I would like this to be on the agenda for the UPF. Please, what can we do? This question is to Dr. Kittle and Dr. Bellavance and our mommy Anne Bellavance. Please, what can we do as UPF to de-escalate the tension between Australia and China? China, we cannot do without China. All the cheap things we buy in Kmart, everything still comes from China. These politicians are trying to break us. And the politicians, they come and go. But the problem they create remains forever to hurt us. We should be united. And I think this is in our doorstep. And that's why, please, I want to ask, what can UPF do? Now there's an election, you hear it, but please, this is very important. China has really helped a lot of the world, different African countries, and we don't want to fight China. If our politicians have issues with them, they should not drag us into this. Please, what can UPF do? Maybe
Thank
to
you.
call the parliamentarians.
Thank you, Edeni, for that question. I think, well, Dr. Kittle, I'm going to handball that one to you. And I think that'll be our last question before we introduce Stefan. Go ahead, Robert.
I was going to give it to you, John. I mean, it's an Australian question.
Okay, well, I'll give this a go. As a general principle, the way that UPF operates in the world is back channels and engagement. We have consistently not isolated ourselves. Our attitude is not to make enemies. Our attitude is to continually engage. And I will share this with you. One of the powerful things about Universal Peace Federation is we have friends both on the left and the right. So many of Dr. Kittle will talk about this. Many people don't like some politicians, Republicans, or they don't like Democrats. The approach that we take is we have friends on all sides and we work together. So I need to answer your question shortly. Our approach, because we're running out of time, our approach is to really open and have conversations. And that's for another conference. And this term is headwing. How do we approach a headwing approach, not a right or left? As Dr. Moon said, the left won't save us and the right won't save us. That may challenge some of you to think about that one. Dr. Kittle, do you want to just share a final word on that one?
It's a tough question. And I think if we, again, work together, because it's not just an Australian problem, it's really a global issue as well. I don't have an easy answer out of the box, but I just feel the importance of being clear on issues of morality, for example, freedom of religion. For example, you know, the Uyghurs who have had their human rights trampled upon. There needs to be clarity and articulation on those issues. We should not just sweep them under the carpet and criticize the West as well. I mean, the chaos that's going on in the woke society now. Let's just have honest dialogue with everyone and open up this venue. And I think that's what UPF is trying to provide, a safe environment where we can communicate and dialogue together. I think that's critically important.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kittle, for your generous time today. Can we again please put our hand together for Dr. Kittle? It is really, it is a privilege today to have with us Mr. Stefan Romaniu. And thank you for being with us today. We know you have a busy schedule, and I just like to say that I'm sure we all have been aware of the developing situations over the last few months and the conflict that is happening in Ukraine. And you know, there are a lot of questions at the moment regarding how could this happen, and you know, why is it happening? And there's you know the facts and the misinformation. So we are privileged to have with us today Stefan to give us the facts and an overview on the situation that is happening and the war that is impacting and you know, displaced families and displaced people in general coming to Australia and going to other countries around the world. In addition, he will give us some insight into his visit to the Polish-Ukraine border earlier this year to assess the situation. So I now present you with the first Vice President of the Ukrainian World Congress and the co-chair of the Australian Federation of Ukraine Organisations, Mr. Stefan Romaniu. Stefan, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity and just listening to some of the conversation. Obviously, we're all looking for peace. We're all looking for, nobody wants war. I've just come back from speaking at the National Lions Convention, 500 or 600 delegates from around Australia, whose mantra is good government and civics, respecting each other. That's why this war is a test of how strong we are in terms of looking after our values and our principles and what sort of a world do we want in the future. And I think from just reading about your organisation, you're about peace. We want to find peace. We want to find middle ground. But I often say that in this situation, and many of you would be in diplomacy, you understand that diplomacy is give and take. In other words, sometimes you've got to give and take. Unfortunately, the people we're dealing with, and Mr. Putin, in his mantra, there is not give and take. his mantra is very much, I take, I win, and you lose. So what I wanted to do just briefly is go over a couple of things that might interest you in terms of when you're talking about having an understanding of why this is happening. And today's agenda, I just briefly wanted to say who we are, what we're doing, how we got here, what are some of the myths, and what are some of the facts. The Australian Federation of Ukrainian Organisations, we're the peak body for Ukrainians in Australia, and we have about 48 to 50,000 Ukraine-born or background Ukrainians, according to the last census. We're members of the Ukrainian World Congress, which I'm vice president of. 20 million Ukrainians outside of in 65 countries. I think it's important when we look at what's happening in Ukraine at the moment that we get the facts. What are the facts? The facts are, and I'll just go one step back. Many of you would have heard Mr. Putin speak at the victory celebrations on May the 9th, where he basically contravened every international accord. He basically lied and basically has no legitimacy in what he said. And as I said at Lions today, I know I'm of Ukrainian background. I was born here. My father was Ukrainian, my mother was German. But like you, I like to be objective. Sometimes you can be subjective, but you've got to be objective in these things. And facts are very, very important. So Ukraine for 70 years was under Soviet rule. In 1991, when in 89, 91, the Soviet Union collapsed. July 1991, Ukraine proclaimed sovereignty. In August, it proclaims independence. And to make sure that the nation was behind that, there was a referendum. And that referendum, 95% of the population voted for independence. And I think it's important to highlight that a high percentage of that were the people in the East that Mr. Putin is pretending to look after. The other fact is that there's the Ukrainian parliament, and the Ukrainian parliament adopted to go to Europe. It decided its path would be Europe. It didn't say we don't want to deal with Russia. It just said we want to be European. And why? Because European lifestyle appealed to people. They started to travel. They saw what Europe was about. And the disinformation that was being sent prior to 1991, that anybody in the West was bourgeois nationalists, Nazi collaborators, and communism was the only way to go, certainly saw that there was another way to live life. In terms of NATO, Ukraine decided that that's what it wanted protection. And so when he says that Ukraine was going to attack, NATO was going to attack, Ukraine is not a member of NATO. And there haven't been any NATO countries that have attacked Russia, nor do they plan to attack Russia. And it'll be interesting to see what Mr. Putin does now in terms of Finland, because his mantra was Ukraine wants to go to NATO, that's going to be on our border, therefore I've got to protect my people. Well, let's see if he takes on the Finns. The EU treaty, again, Ukraine decided that it wanted to go in a particular direction. Our delegation is going over to the EU the 28th, I think it's the 29th of May, to advocate for the acceptance of Ukraine into the EU. We also have a constitution, and it's enshrined in our constitution in terms of where Ukraine wants to go. So it can, or it has the right to its own sovereignty, its integrity, and it's not a threat to anybody. So the act of February 24, it has no legitimacy. There's no legitimacy in attacking Ukraine because of NATO. There is no legitimacy in attacking Ukraine because Russians are being discriminated against. Because if you look at the facts again, when Mr. Putin and Russia and the Green Soldiers attacked Crimea and annexed Crimea and then went into the east of Ukraine, which people tried to portray as a civil war, which is not a civil war. 1.5 million of that population, the bulk of that population moved out of Donbass and Luhansk and didn't go to Europe, but found its place, displaced persons in Ukraine itself. So again, who are you trying to defend, apart from the people that you distributed Russian passports to? So he was giving out Russian passports like you give out lollies, wanting to people to a reason to fight. So we want to debunk those moves. The propaganda about Nazi denationalization, that's an old Soviet trick, been going around, as explained to people this morning. Prior to 1991, there was a publication, one of many, called Ukrainian Visti, which were Visti is Ukraina, news from Ukraine or Herald from Ukraine. What it said was that we were all the people around the table here, not just Ukrainians, we were Nazi collaborators, we were fascists, we were all those things that he's trying to now argue have been debunked. He says there is no war. Well, Blind Freddy can see there's a war because thousands of people are dying, tanks are getting blown up, missiles are flying. I don't know what do you call it if you don't call it a war? In terms of Bucha, you would have seen that, the atrocities there. His argument, their argument, Lavrov's argument, Peskov's argument, Peskov's his mouthpiece, that this was a documentary put together by Ukraine. Now, how absurd is that when UN, UNICEF, others have gone in there, bodies are there, women have been raped, bodies are lying on the road, and the reason that they left because the Ukrainians had squashed them out of there, forced them out, and all of a sudden they had to leave everything behind. This morning, a story came of an 88-year-old woman who was raped in front of her husband, who was an invalid, and it's a strange documentary that Ukraine would be putting on. So in terms of the regions, I've mentioned that as well. The regions, Donetsk, Luhansk, are not up for grabs. They are not negotiable. Today at the Lions Convention, I mentioned this. We had representatives from New Zealand there, and it's like some New Zealand coming in and saying, you know what, we'll take Tasmania and Western Australia because we think that there are more New Zealanders in there and we need to protect them. It's absurd. So the fake keeps on going. The Bucha I've spoken about, that is again a war crimes issue. Genocide. People say you can't argue genocide. Well, you know, when your intention in what is genocide, definition of genocide was coined by Raphael Lemkin, a Polish Jew, who it's the eradication of. And what did Putin say when he started his term many, many years ago? The biggest downfall of the 20th century was the fact that the Soviet Union collapsed, and his intention was to bring it all back together again. That was one issue. But when he wants to exterminate, get rid of people, as he's doing now, that's genocide. So there's no justification for this. And my message is this, and again, we can argue as much as we like about, you know, whether we should have war, we shouldn't have war. There is no justification for this war. The war crimes issue, we're also working on that here in Australia with the Federation. The Federation, we have a working party of lawyers headed up by William Lai, who's a Queen's Counsel, many international lawyers who are looking at this issue to take witness from the people that have arrived here as displaced persons. Again, when you look at the dimensions of the conflict, it is huge. Losses in human losses, in buildings, in infrastructure. But, you know, in terms of the Ukrainians who die, get killed, will always be heroes. They'll always be heroes because Ukrainians have a saying, "Heroi ne vmiraют." In other words, heroes never die. They will live because their memory will live because they fought for their nation. What do mothers and fathers in Russia say when the body bags, the ones that do come back, what do they say about their children? Why this happened? Are they going to be heroes? Heroes defending what? The injustifiable. Australia's response. The Australian government has been very, very supportive. And to start off with, in terms of humanitarian aid, in terms of military aid, which I'll come to, But we also worked with the Prime Minister and Minister for Immigration, opposition as possible. So there's people applied for a tourist visa. They will now transfer to another humanitarian visa. Governments are providing funding for case officers. The community, I've just come, for example, from a community event. We have a church hall which is full of clothes that have been not donated, but donated in terms of secondhand, but donated brand new. And the people who have settled here, we're trying to support them that way. And we have national committees and state committees, and we have meet and greets. And our objective is to try and make those who are displaced, who are here, feel that as much at home as possible, and to try and take some of those stresses away. Australia has also provided military aid, and the Bushmasters you would hear about. There's ongoing support for Australia. For Ukraine, there's support being given. The armed forces, as Ukraine has a very highly organised armed force, and you can see that by the way they're fighting. But they also have reservists, and they have territorial brigades. Those territorial brigades are the civilians who live in a particular area and have grouped together to fight off Russian invasion. Ukraine's call out has been pretty straightforward. You can see what's happening on the ground. Ukraine's winning that on the ground. But on the other hand, Ukraine has asked for a no-fly zone, which is not happening. If there was a no-fly zone, you wouldn't have this situation of where we have at the moment, where missiles are flying. Also, they're not asking for boots on the ground. Nobody's asking for boots on the ground. What they're asking for is weaponry to support. I went to Poland with the president of the Ukrainian World Congress. Basically, we wanted to do two things: show support for Ukraine, and also to understand what was happening on the border. And when you see what's happening on the border, you can't but feel helpless in one sense. But on the other hand, you say to yourself, well, what can we do? And being on the border, you see people who have come from the war-torn zone. You see they've got a bag, they're carrying their children, they're carrying next to nothing. And they're asking the question, how did this happen? I just want to relay one story to you. You may have heard about the bombings of Yavoril. Yavoril was about 20 km from the Polish border. We were there. The first lot of people that came from Yavoril came off a bus. They were traumatized. I spoke to a mother who's breastfeeding her child, who has another child in her hand, who's carrying nothing more than a bag, and her child has a scooter. Now, many of us on here will have either children or grandchildren. My wife and I have 5 grandchildren. Our youngest is Emerson, who has a scooter. When I saw that child with a similar scooter to my Emerson, I nearly broke down. I thought to myself, what is this poor child doing here? Why is this poor child suffering? So you have this situation in Ukraine where people are being brought over to the Polish border, and the Poles are doing a great job. We went for a fact-finding mission. We wanted to know what was happening. We met with the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Ukraine, Mr. Kuleba. We also took aid to Lviv, to the mayor of Lviv. This is, if you can imagine your big stores, and you have, 1,500, 2,000 stretcher beds, kitchens, child minding facilities, people being totally traumatized, wondering, I got up yesterday, I had a plan for today, and overnight, look what happened. And this is how they live. They live in these, and the Poles are doing, as I said, a great job. From an AFUO, Australian Federation of Ukrainian Organisations point of view, we obviously have different meetings with which I've mentioned to you. At the moment, we have about 2,700 of the 7,000 or so visas. They are now being looked after by the community. I'll just give you another figure. The Australian community has been absolutely fantastic. We have 2,700 people who put up their hands around the country to take people in if need be. That equates to 7,800 beds. That just shows Australia at its best. in supporting. We have businesses who are saying, we can help you find employment. We have people who will take people in their homes. We work closely with Caritas Ukraine and with Rotary. What we've been able to do so far is, this is a bit out of date, we're close to 4 million. We send humanitarian aid. We work with the Ministry of Health. We've just had 190 pallets taken over to Ukraine, delivered through different agencies and on the ground. We're very conscious of the fact of thinking globally but acting locally, understanding what the needs are, and we have this support program that we're doing, and people have been very, very, very supportive. Delivering support to the ground, we need to know. For example, yesterday in Zaporizhia was one of the bombed areas. The hospital there, they needed medical equipment and so on. We had that delivered to them. We also have the Ukrainian World Congress. We've had a $20 million campaign. We have, in those territorial brigades that I mentioned, they go in pretty naked, in the sense of they don't have protective gear and so on. So we've tried to do as much as we can to provide them with the right vests, to be able to have the tourniquets, things like that, which to us seem straightforward, but are really important things in terms of first aid. And back to where you started, well, what I heard, why is this our war? Because it's a war of ethics, it's a war of accountability, of principles, of integrity, and of values. That's what we're fighting for. If Ukraine loses, the world will lose. So we need to put this into context, that ultimately it's not just the Ukraine war. It's not just about somebody trying to claim territory. We are now being constantly threatened in terms of our values, that anybody can do anything and there will be no response. Well, I think Mr. Putin's got the response that he thought. Roadmap out. Last issue. Roadmap out. Is there a roadmap out? When I look at what Putin is saying, in other words, we want territory. Well, Ukraine won't give up territory. Give up people. Ukraine won't give up people. So what's the roadmap out? The roadmap out seems to be that Mr. Putin has enough pressure put on him internationally, has enough pressure put on him from his own people, because there are many Russians who do not support this war and don't understand it. And therefore, that roadmap out, a lot may rely on prayer, a lot may rely on a little bit about what your organization is about, is trying to find, a way out of this. But it's a very complex issue. That war will continue for some time. We don't see that it's going to finish anytime soon. It may turn out to be an insurgent type war, but the Ukrainians are very, very committed. They will not give up. They will not give up, because today, for example, just to finish off, one of the things that Lions did today, they marched in flags. They had some flags, and the symbolism of a flag. What is a flag? A flag, it's not just a piece of cloth. It represents sovereignty. It represents integrity, territorial integrity. It represents a nation. So if you want to rip up that flag, and that's what Putin wants to do, rip up that flag into bits and pieces, that just ain't going to happen. So the Ukrainians are very, very committed in doing what they are. And, from our point of view, our asks are, if people want to support, we have the Ukrainian Crisis Appeal, we have YouHelp on our website, aussieukes.org. You can find not only what we've collected, but how that money has been spent. And the last slide is just to say thank you to Australia, because Australia has been terrific, not just from a government point of view, but from a point of view of society, understanding that we are all in this together because we have a value system and we have principles. So thanks for the opportunity, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Stefan. Please, if you have a question, could you please indicate so by the reaction button? And happy to take Dr. Kittle, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Wonderful in terms of the clarity and the conviction that you portrayed. That is encouraging. My question is, what do you think the impact will be on China and its kind of adventures into Taiwan? How will that play itself out?
Doctor, look, I'll go back a couple of steps. You know, I've been doing a lot of media over the last month. I do a lot of Sky News. I nearly said to Sky News, you know, it's about time you gave me a contract because I'm on here every second night. On Australia Day, I'm an Australia Day ambassador. I used to chair the Australia Day committee here in Australia, in Victoria, and I was in Shepparton. I was in a region near Shepparton, and I did a TV cross on one of the morning programs, and I said that war was imminent. And people said to me later, "Oh, look, you're a warmonger. You want war. We don't want war." But I did say then, why I'm saying this is Ukraine loses, the world loses. For China, this is not just China. I don't think it's just China. I think there are other countries in the world who look at this and say, well, you know what? If the response is a weak response, then what's stopping us? So I think China, again, you know, if you look at China, you look at India at the moment, in terms of support for Russia or lack of support for Ukraine, put it any way you like, China can play, in actual fact, China can play a major role if it had the same value system that we all aspire to. If China were to say to Putin, listen, mate, this has gone too far, then it would be over, it'd be done and dusted, because he hasn't any support. But if China says that, what does it mean to its future when it wants to expand? So, you know, we've had the whole conversation here about Solomon Islands and expansion and so on. You know, today's world, it's not about the Ukraine situation is one situation by force. There are other ways of infiltrating. We've seen those sort of things. And I think we have to be very, very careful to understand that the concept of territorial integrity, of sovereignty, of being, you know, the master in your own land is critical. And if those values go, then I think, you know, we want nothing more. What do we want? We want a great world for our children. That's what we want. We want our children to be able to go to school, we'll go on holiday, we want a thing, we want to live. But all that's being threatened now, you know, and the mental impact, the impact, I think nationally and internationally is huge on people, because my wife cries every day. She looks at this, she cries, why is this happening? So the China perspective, we see what's happening in China now with COVID, the way things are being dealt with. But I think the China-Taiwan issue, I think, and Chinese expansionism, you know, are they sitting there and waiting for this to just get over and then continue? I think we have to be careful. I think there's a lot of consequences out of this, and that's why this is not just Ukraine's war. Yeah.
Well, you know, today we're commemorating the United Nations International Day of Families, and our thoughts and prayers are with the families of Ukraine during these difficult times. And I'd like to, you know, perhaps put it to you: how can universal peace to the situation right now? How can we be able to assist?
Look, I think there's a number of ways. Okay, look, you got to look at it. It's like the Lions convention said to me. What every day I get asked, what can I do? I think that depending on where we sit. So today, for example, we could say, look, there's humanitarian aid. You know, go out there, collect money, help in this way, help in the settlement process. But knowing, I mean, the cohort here, I think you have a wide sphere of influence, and a wide sphere of influence is what? It's writing opinion pieces, swaying support in favor of Ukraine. I think this group, again, because you're so focused on peace, I think that message, if you can get that message out, that, you know what, in your writings, in academia, wherever you can, in your commentary in the media, that what we really want is peace. We're looking for peace. So we want to see this roadmap for peace. We don't want war. I think if you're able to help us in selling that message, because we do have one problem, which I see coming, and that's called Ukraine fatigue. Okay, so if you remember the last month or so, I mean, there wouldn't be a news service without Ukraine, you know, about Ukraine on the first page of newspapers. I picked up the Herald Sun in Melbourne today. There's nothing in there. Okay, so I think your sphere of influence is very, very important, because getting people to think about particular things is very, very important, and also your sway internationally to be able to, you know, you were talking about other parts of the world before, to be able to sway people's thinking about this and pushing people towards peace. I think that's where I think you can be very, very beneficial, because I think you've got a very strong cohort of people here who, you know geopolitics, are connected, and can help us in that way. If you want to help us in another way, some people want to help in terms of dollars or assistance, or if there are any medicos here and they can help us with medical equipment and so on, you can help us that way. But I think pushing the thought through, doing what you do well, and that is selling the message of peace.
Thank you. Roland, please go ahead.
Thank you, Will, and thank you, Stefan. Thank you for taking the time to join us here today.
Yeah, right.
We all understand how busy you are. It is quite obvious that Ukraine is not likely to surrender, and it doesn't appear that there is a military solution to this problem. And the fact that there is sufficient international pressure on Russia to stop or put an end to its invasion of Ukraine. Other than this international pressure, and I think you've alluded to the fact that this will gradually, unfortunately, will gradually start to fade and will no longer be top priority for many nations around the world. We've seen the hypocrisy and the double standards by the international community on more than one occasion. What would be the end? I mean, how will Ukraine deal with this in the absence of, as I said, the influence of the international community? How will this suffering end?
Thanks, Roland, and hope you're well. Long time no see. We go back a little bit of time. There are a couple of things I think we could look at. When I was in Ukraine, there is a video that's being put on social media and also TV, because President Zelensky has a very smart group of communicators behind him who have been able to sell the message, Ukraine's message, very, very well. They were trump cards in terms of speaking to all parliaments, including the Australian Parliament and so on. But there are a couple of other options I think that we can look at. In that video, this Ukrainian government, they've already started this. They show the war, but they also have started the campaign to rebuild Ukraine. So, for example, our ambassador was here in Melbourne. I was in Perth today. I was in Adelaide the other day. We're talking about the rebuild. How will you rebuild? What's this new Ukraine going to look like? So, in other words, there's part of this is about the war, and part about is rebuild. But what's one of the things that might help? One of the things we've been very strong about, and I've been critical a little bit of the Americans about this. When I was in Poland, we met with some people on both sides, the Democrats and the Republicans, and I just gave them Australia as an example. I said, we have a bipartisan approach. I mean, I speak to the Prime Minister, and I speak to Andrew Albanese, I speak to Maurice Payne, I speak to Penny Wong. They're all saying we support. So Ukraine, as much as we talk about the government, because the government of the day is the one that provides the funds and that, the Australian Parliament supports Ukraine. Now, if that's the case, I've said to the Americans, had you 2 years ago stop worried about, whether you're a Trumpite or whether you're, a Republican or a Democrat, and stop playing with Ukraine, because Ukraine was being a bit of a tool, and it often is. And I think one of the best things the Americans have been fantastic. You can't deny that they've helped. But one of the things that up until now there've been a lot of discussions about Ukraine without Ukraine. So there were all these the Macrons, the Merkels, everybody's talking. And Zelensky took a position, and we took a position as the World Congress. No conversation about Ukraine without Ukraine. So what does that mean? We asked then, and that's come into power now, but the SWIFT program, taking away that ability to the transference of funds, the Magnitsky Act, the repossession of assets, and so on. Now that's slowly impacting. But I'm just finishing a book. I've just finished a book about what the West doesn't know about Putin. And there are a number of people around Putin who are oligarchs who, you take Abramovich, the guy who owned Chelsea. Okay, he was going to sell the Chelsea Football Club because he was going to be the big hero. No, didn't. He saw the writing on the wall, and he was going to sell the club, and he was going to give the money to Ukraine. We sent a message to our friends in the UK. You make sure in the media you get a strong message out, mate. You are not giving us anything. We are taking back what you stole. So if you start to have people around him, and that's starting to bite, for example, Putin's yacht, ship, whatever he's got in Italy, being repossessed. You're an oligarch. You've lived the life. We're saying, for example, in Great Britain, where their children are studying, send them home, pack them up, send them home, go to mum and dad. You live in Russia until this thing's sorted. If you're an oligarch like Abramovich, and all of a sudden you come to your house in Chelsea and you can't open the door because there's a lock on it, and you go to the ATM and there's no money, decline, and you go to your yacht, it's been repossessed. That's one of the pressures that I think locally the Russians can do. The other issue is I think the Russian, look, there are a lot of people who do not support this war. We have rallies around Australia, and we have Russian community, members of the Russian community joining us. But at the same time, they need to put the pressure. And they've said to us, well, how did you do the Orange Revolution? How did you do the Revolution of Dignity? All you need in Russia is a spark. You need a spark that basically says, you know what, our economy's down. I don't know whether you saw there was an academic, it was a mouthpiece for Putin, saying, well, we don't care about your sanctions. We don't care about your sanctions. Our economy's fine. Employment's up. Everything's fine. I mean, who are you trying to bluff? The ruble's stable. Everything's fine. How long is that going to last? The more pressure that the West puts on Russia, the sooner we'll find a solution. And I think Russia and Russian people and the oligarchs around him are the people who can be part of the jigsaw. There is a jigsaw to the solution, but that they are part of that in my opinion. We know that he's 2IC, allegedly. I'm not sure whether this hasn't been verified, that there's been some reach out to the West to say, listen, you know what, we need to talk. Okay. So there are people behind him now, but most of the people around him are too scared because of the way he operates. He has an army, and I'm looking at you, Roland, and you're looking at me, and Roland's looking at somebody else, and nobody knows who's who in the zoo, and all of a sudden everybody's very scared. But I think the pressure from the West, the economics, Magnitsky, bringing people to justice. I mean, in Australia, I would suggest that, part of Gold Coast is dirty money. Maybe it's not just dirty Russian money, maybe it's dirty Ukrainian money, because 20, 30 years ago, that's where people were dumping money. You know what? You can't justify it, you lose it. And I think those sorts of things are the things that, they're the human side of this thing, which he doesn't care. But I think the people around him have a hell of a lot to lose, as Russia as a nation.
Yeah. Thank you, Stefan. Any more questions, please, for Stefan?
Will, I think before Dr. Kittle goes and Stefan goes and all of you go, I think we might certainly take a couple of questions, but I'd like to just conclude a few remarks and thank Stefan and Dr. Kittle for being here today. I just want to remind you that, as Stefan pointed out, our sphere of influence, and I'd like to ask Dr. Kittle just to conclude remarks. Actually, you conclude on that. UPF is a seriously big organization and has an outreach in over 150 countries. And we have friends, Stefan, on the left and the right, and it's actually our strength. So you were pointing out that in Australia we take a bipartisan approach. I think that's very powerful. It's one of our key points of peace building, that we can work with people from different perspectives. So maybe Dr. Kittle, since you just share a couple of words, and then possibly we can hang around and take a form. If Stefan can hang around, maybe we can take a few more questions. But I'd like to formally conclude, if that's all right, Will, at this point. Dr.
Sure.
Kittle, you're about to go to some other major event. Would you like to just share a few words about our influence? And I just want to encourage everyone to join with us at UPF. Go ahead, Robert.
Again, thank you, Stefan, for your passion in the presentation that you've given. It's palatable, and I think we're all with you in heart. There's no doubt about that. UPF's stand is, we are, I don't know, I mean, that's really kind of the American side, where I'm on the Asian side here, but in America and in Europe, it's a quandary, because like you're German and Ukrainian, but we have a very big presence in Russia, and we've got a very big presence in Ukraine. And so if we side with one overtly, against Russia, so strongly, that will backlash ultimately, even in our movement there in Russia. So I think our support is there very clearly, because we are so passionate about Korea, because our founders are from Korea. So we are seeing, in one sense, the situation in Russia as, I don't know, as Russia and Ukraine, that situation as a scenario that is not isolated exclusively in Europe, but what we're trying to prevent in the Korean Peninsula, where you've got, again, a nuclear North Korea against the South Korea, the aggression, the bullying, and then of course in China and Taiwan as well, we've got a strong delegation in both of those countries. So we're trying to take what John mentioned earlier, is this headwing approach, where we have to find and identify the problem, not the real root of the problem, which I said is not Russia, but it's this idea that you mentioned, that the sovereignty of one nation can be imposed on another. This self-centeredness on the scale of a national level is really at the root of the problem. Anyway, we're dealing with this as the best that we can. We've got the Korean Peninsula that we're working with, China, Taiwan. Just if you're interested in a Chinese speaker, we had someone from New Zealand that spoke. His name is Professor Bo from New Zealand. Excellent speaker in our last presentation. Very clear. He's Chinese, and he was very clear in his presentation, and also critical of not China, because he's Chinese, but particularly of the Chinese Communist Party, and identifying their aggression and going back there. But anyway, thank you for your presentation. Those are just some thoughts that I have based on what you've done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for
very
the
much.
opportunity.
Stefan, if you want to hang around, I'm sure some more people, but as of this point, Will, shall we conclude our session for today? And I think it was Stefan, I think Randall's got his hand up. So look, Robert, thank you. If you need to go, please go. All of you who are attending are busy people and leaders in your own area. But so I wish you all the best. And Stefan, let's talk how we can work with you. I'm sure we can.
Sure.
I'll just make one comment about the fact that you have representation in Russia and Ukraine and other parts of the world. What's happening here, I don't think is solely Russia, Ukraine. Surely people who are in Russia looking for peace could not support murder, rape, what's happening at the moment. So I think that the road to peace, again, is I think if you do have in Russia there is representation, that I think they can also play a critical role in articulating to the Russian population what is it the road to peace. And the road to peace is certainly not what their leadership is doing at the moment. So I just leave you with that thought.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, Brenda, would you like to ask Stefan your question, please?
Yeah, thank you. I'm very active with the Geelong Interfaith Network. Geelong has been earmarked as the place where a lot of the refugees from Ukraine will be heading. The Victorian government likes to do that. They like to send people out to the provincial areas rather than the capital. And so they get a bit of an experience with that. So Geelong is going to be getting a influx of different refugees in the near future. And as far as clothing, these type of things, the Geelong Interfaith Network is very interested in helping out the Ukraine population that will be coming in. Just wondering what's the best way to, because with the interfaith, we're in relation to about 12 different major faith groups around the area, and so denominations or faith groups. Yep. And so it's a small group, maybe 20 people, but it represents thousands within the churches. So how's the best way to help out when
thank you. For example, I think it's I forget, Reverend or Pastor from the it's either, I think it's the Baptist Church there has reached out to us. The best in Geelong, wrong football team. I back for Essendon, so I recently spoke at the Geelong Business Council, and had to take a photo outside of whatever you call it now, Cardinia Park, whatever it's called, and then everybody laughed at me why I've transferred to Geelong. In Geelong, we have the Association of Ukrainians of Victoria. They are part of our structure. They are doing a lot of work in, we know that there are not all that many there at the moment. A lot of them are, that's family reunion. They're at 57 Packington Street, Geelong West. Lyuba Prishlak is the chair of that, the president of the branch, but also you might know Linda Sedler-Petkovic, who is chair of Diversitat. She's also Ukraine. She's also connected with that. So the community in Geelong would welcome that, any support that you can have. And I think, again, that some of the people, those displaced people, they come from various denominations. So I think the fact that we could show them that there's, interfaith groups such as yours, I think is also a very positive sign. So Linda and Luba would be your contacts, and I could send those to you through either through John or through Roland. But 57 Packington Street, that's where the action is. They had a market last Sunday, I think it was. They're doing a lot of work in making people, because part of what we're doing is, I met with some people this morning, and we've got over the politics of, visas and all that. What we have to do is give people life skills. They need accommodation, they need jobs, they need to live, they need to have, they just have integrity. They want, it's, there are other things. For example, I met with the governor, with Linda Dessau last week, with our ambassador, and also with Maurice Payne, the Minister for Women. I'm very keen in setting up women's networks, because most of the people who have come, with 38% are children under the age of 18, 50% are mothers under the age of 50, because the fathers can't come out, and then the other percentages are people over 50. But we have some younger people here who've obviously got children, and some of us have got grandchildren. But I sometimes I say to my wife, geez, I feel like a real heel when I think what I was doing when our kids were young, and now that I've got grandchildren. But those mothers are stuck, shouldn't say stuck, those mothers have those children, all the time. And what we want to be able to do is give those children an opportunity. They're in schools, but the preschool we're trying to work at, but forget mothers to come together. So even in the Geelong area, it would be good if we were able to work together. And again, some of the women from the interfaith groups could interact. to give the women the opportunity to speak. You know, they have gone through trauma. Whilst they might, you know, have a smile on their face, they're crying inside. Therefore, a lot of things we can do. So Geelong's pretty well set up. Packington Street, just up the road from Cardinia Park.
It's good to know that you have those details right on the top of your head. Sounds like you're well, you know, linked to a lot of the different things there. So thanks for that.
Look, I'll send through the contacts in Geelong.
If you look for the chat area on this Zoom, I've shared the email account for Geelong.
Please, and if you could please also,
And
also, Stefan, if you could please share your presentation with us, that'll be great as well.
Sure. I think I sent it to something. I sent it to some. I think I sent it.
Look, Stefan, folks, I have the presentations.
Yep.
So I'll be emailing that out to all those who are registered and the ones that I know are here. So not a problem.
Okay, terrific.
Done and dusted.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me just have a look on this. Why don't I just give you, because I like to do things now, because let me just put into the chat, if I can. Right. 412-463-680. That's Luba's number. She's the president there. Otherwise, I forget, and I'm going to watch Essendon play the Swans on TV a bit later on, so I'll forget about some of this stuff. So that's her number, and I'll let her know that you'll reach out.
thank you very much for that, Stefan.
Let's wrap it up, folks. I think I'm going to say goodbye and push the big end button. Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you, Stefan,
Enjoy the game.
on today.
Thank you. See you.
Stefan,
All the best.
your comment